The Breakfast Club is definitely the best in its class.
Now you're playing with power.
Beyond reality, beyond dreams, beyond your imagination, lays a genre of music where your heroes are real. Monsters lurk in long shadows. The cities reach the heavens, and the summer nights never end. Music that fills you with feelings of longing, of warmth, of fear, and of exhilaration. Music where nostalgia of bygone days are rejuvenated by modern imagination and passionate experimentation. This music is known as Synthwave. Ladies and gentlemen and non-binary buds, it's me. It's AJP, Andos for short. And I am joined here not just by one of the best damn editors on the scene, but someone who loves the subject of which we will be discussing today. From the bottom of my heart, a really good friend, hailing from across the pond, SamTheVAMod. My friend, how are we doing today?
Greetings, pop stars, metalheads, and cyberpunks of the internet. Hi, everybody. Hi, Andos.
Hello.
Well, that's very kind words of you. Thank you ever so much, my man. I am doing very well, thank you. I am so excited to finally be able to talk to someone, especially as well a good friend, about this niche genre of music that has captured my heart like no other genre of music has.
Hell yeah. So, I've been thinking about doing a video like this for the longest time, because I used to be a big fan of the channel Deep Cuts, where this guy Oliver would like have a specific genre of music, whether that be industrial, whether that be post-punk or Afrobeat, and he would like choose 5 different albums to best represent the genre. And ever since I watched that, I thought to myself, I could totally do that if I had a YouTube channel. And it just so happens that now that I'm doing it, and I've met someone like you who's as passionate about the genre as I am, I couldn't think of anyone better to do this video with.
It's crazy. It was through kind of almost as well sheer kind of like offshoot conversations we've had with one another when we both immediately discovered that we loved synthwave so much. And I say it's a long time coming as well, ever since, well, I partially blame my own podcast, The Sweet Chinwag, for it as well, which you guested on. You did a guest spot when we were talking about FTR, and I innocuously just brought up like FTR or the wrestling equivalent of synthwave, and I can immediately remember the visceral reaction that got from you of like, oh.
See, and it's funny too, because I remember you did the 2022 video for Joseph Montecillo, and you were playing music by the Midnight, and I was like, this guy has something. He knows ball in some way.
Yeah, I had to. I mean, it was my favorite album of 2022. So, you know, I wasn't going to add anything else other than the Midnight.
Right. But yeah, so of course, this isn't just like an overview of like 5 albums that we both love. I kind of wanted this to be like an overview and like a recommendation where we talk about not just like, you know, music that we love, but also the things that like inspired Synthwave and the artists within it, and also like media that best represents the genre and like what had inspired it. It's kind of like a massive overview of kind of the culture itself, if that makes sense.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. Because I feel like if one thing you know when you even dip your toe into this, and I think by the end you'll realize, is that there is a lot of culture that surrounds this genre. More than any that I've experienced at the very least anyway.
Exactly. Now, of course, when getting into Synthwave, we all have our history with it. So what did you listen to, or like what was the album, artist, or like spark that kind of lit your interest in Synthwave?
So my journey kind of starts around the early 10s. I have always been a fan of just music in general. I like to say to a lot of people when it goes, what's your favorite type of music? And I go, well, I take it from my dad, and that I have what's called a shotgun blast approach to music, and that I will listen to literally anything from any genre and find enjoyment out of it. So I partially blame my dad for doing that for me. But, you know, it meant that I grew up with a lot of music like prog rock, 70s rock, jazz, classical, soul, Motown, all of that stuff. And he had huge love for new wave. Most notably, what's become 2 of my favorite bands of all time in New Order and the Human League.
New Order.
Because they absolutely dominated the 80s in every sense of the word. And the fact that they're still touring and they're still, like, both of them are still cohesive bands and groups shows you just the timeless energy of both New Order and the Human League. And so, yeah, it kind of got started in the 10s. I was listening to a lot more sort of electronic music at this time, obviously, the biggest culprit being Daft Punk. And then that slowly morphed into listening to more niche artists in the scene. And I think it was right after a certain film, which I know that we're going to be talking about at length, came out, that I suddenly realized that there was this group of people that were making music heavily inspired by tracks of the 80s, employing a lot of production techniques, using a lot of instrumentation from the time, and I was hooked. And from that point on, I was just, give me anything and everything that you can find from this genre, and I will listen to it. And I've never looked back since.
I think it's really funny that you talk about how you had the shotgun blast of music culture from your dad, because, as a quick aside, my dad is the biggest Rush fan you will ever meet.
Yes.
And like he owned like every single album they had from like 1975 to 1983 of Rush. And like he got me so hooked up on that, prog rock, and a lot of different like music of the time, Dave Matthews as well. But in terms of like getting into Synthwave as a whole, it kind of feels like the film you are referring to, that we will discuss later, was kind of the patient zero of like how I found out that like there was music like this being inspired by the 80s. And I kind of just like forget about it until like my first year of community college, where I was watching this video that was talking about like the media that inspired Hotline Miami. And in it, they were discussing, oh, well, if you're into the musical side, check out these groups called Kavinsky and Laserhawk. And I was like, huh, that's really interesting. And from there, I kind of like go down the rabbit hole of like, you know, Kavinsky, Laserhawk, Time Cop 1983, Carpenter Brute, everyone. And we'll discuss all those bands in general. But it was kind of funny too. We will. And I think from there too, I kind of go down the rabbit hole of more like different wave related music, like going from synthwave, I go into vaporwave, I go into city pop, which is not really wave music, but like very nostalgic based music. And it's always had that weirdly, how shall I put it, wistful almost energy of it, to where like you never really grew up in the time that the music's referencing or is like from, but like it feels nostalgic. And we'll definitely like talk about that on a more like philosophical and like broader subject. No doubt a lot of you are probably listening to this right now and wondering, what is synthwave, right? Where did it come from? What are the characteristics of it? Who pioneered it? So for a brief crash course, and Sam, you can jump in if you want to add any more details, synthwave is a micro-genre of the electronic music scene that, in about the 2000s at the time, took place in really, there wasn't anywhere else this was going to take place other than France. And this was the, this was known as the French Touch period of electronic music, where like you had groups that were taking music samples from the 70s and 80s disco, and like you had Justice and Daft Punk getting really big in the mainstream. But within that like sector, there was like this small underground of artists in the mid to late 2000s known as the Valérie Collective in the Nantes region of France. And again, I apologize for my pronunciation. I took French in high school for like my entire time, and I still can't pronounce any of this shit. So I do apologize in advance. And these artists of the Valérie Collective included, but not limited to, the Outrunners, Anorak, Mathelevin, and the group founder, David Grelier, aka College. But the most prominent and well-known of the earliest synthwave artists, releasing his first EP in 2005 called Teddy Boy, with having what is considered the first synthwave song, Testarossa Auto Drive, by one Vincent Beloge, aka Kavinsky. Put a pin in that name. It will become very important later. Taking inspiration from their youth in the 1980s, whether that be taking their inspiration from film, television, video games, or music videos, and most curiously enough, Grand Theft Auto Vice City often is credited as a major inspiration for the genre, with its neon aesthetics, fictional Vice City being basically Miami in the 1980s, and of course general synth artist inspirations of the likes of, Vangelis, Tangerine Dream, and what will become most obvious, John Carpenter, but to name a few. In fact, in an interview with What's in the Hi-Fi, Grelier highlights this inspiration for his musical style by saying, "College is primarily influenced by 80s soaps in an aesthetic which I particularly like. Colors, images, silvery films, and the sun images of Los Angeles, Chicago, and all the other cities that I discovered from television, which continue to fascinate me." And it's with this influence of 80s nostalgia in mind that common characteristics of synthwave music intrinsically builds its musical features to emanate an 80s sound. Through predominantly keyboards, drum machines, and certain artists will implement guitars and saxophone to closely resemble 80s sounding songs. I'm looking at you, The Midnight. And what really brings and defines the synthwave sound is how this instrumentation is utilized, with deep, textured songwriting, layered harmonies, coming together to create either these eerie and ominous atmospheres with their instrumentation, in the case for subgenres like dark synth, where artists like Perturbator and Power Glove are trying to generate more horror or cyberpunk adjacent vibes, making the listener feel like they're being stalked by a killer, or feeling like a lone wolf, roaming a decaying metropolis run by a sadistic megacorporation, or even warm and longing atmospheres from artists like FM84 or The Midnight, to give the listener the feeling of driving down a long road in endless summer, or feeling long-lost love for someone you wish you would never end in the respective subgenres of dreamwave and chillwave. Anything you want to add to that?
No, I think you pretty much hit the nail on the head with everything there. Other than it's just, I think when you come into this, remember, like all electronic music, it's incredibly French.
Profoundly French. So here's where we get into the major progenitors of what brings synthwave from underground music scene to overground mainstream success. And that would be, in my opinion, 3 major progenitors to which establish legitimacy towards synthwave as a music genre. Now, earlier I mentioned Georges Grillier being a prominent member of the early synthwave scene, and he would soon get the opportunity to collaborate with synth pop group Electric Youth to produce the song Real Hero, to be used for an upcoming film by Nicholas Winding Refn, of whom Kavinsky would also have a track called Night Call included into the film. This little film known as Drive. Okay, the floor is yours, Sam.
This, funnily enough, is the original copy of Drive that I bought back in 2011 when it was released. My God, what do I have to say about this film that already hasn't been said by so many other people, other than it's just... This is the fuse. This is the fuse that is going to light the spark of all synthwave. If memory serves me correct, this is actually based on a novel of the same name. But was kind of almost, in a sense, kind of creative liberties were sort of taken with the whole thing. It has the same sort of structure, but there are certain differences here and there with the entire thing. Man, I knew of Nicholas Winding Refn from his work in Bronson. So when I heard that there was going to be sort of a neo-noir car action film, very similar to sort of like films like The Driver and Vanishing Point, this immediately sold it to me. And then immediately, I think about 10 minutes in, well, the first 10 minutes with Tick of the Clock by the Chromatics, with that opening heist scene, sold it to me. And then Night Call hits you for the opening credits.
Ooh, Night Call.
And that profoundly changed my entire life at that point.
I don't think it can be understated how this altered the brain chemistry of an entire generation of men.
I swear to God, in the next 3 years, I keep bringing this up because I have to illustrate a point. Every other person was wearing this souvenir jacket.
I want that jacket so bad.
I come to realize that, you know, it became very out of fashion very quickly. But there's no denying that in terms of costumes, very few are still as iconic as the drivers in this one. I know a lot of people also knock Ryan Gosling's acting in this, but honestly, I genuinely think this might be one of his best acted roles, because you got to realize this is a stoic, loner individual who does not talk to anybody, has no time for no one, until he bumps into his next door neighbor Irene, played by Carey Mulligan, in a terrific role, may I add. And then she starts opening up more. I genuinely think, like, the sooner you realize that, I think that you get more enjoyment out of this film. Although I will say this, I heard recently someone said, think of it as a film where the protagonist is the psycho killer. And it opens up by kind of like, you look at the film a lot more differently. It's like, it's the psychopath that turns good at the end.
Hey, real hero and a real human being. What can you say?
Exactly. Talking of cast though, man, watching this recently, it's crazy that how stacked the cast is.
It really is.
Ryan Gosling and Carey Mulligan in the 2 lead roles. Oscar Isaac, Bryan Cranston, Albert Brooks, Ron Perlman. That's Christina Hendricks. That is an insane cast to have.
It really is. And it's interesting that you talk about Ryan Gosling's acting. I watched it again last night, and it really can't be understated how, like, incredible he is just by looking at his eyes. Like, so many shots are focused in on, like, his eyes on the rear view mirror, and, like, depending on the scene, you can see so many different emotions and feelings just by the eyes alone, whether that's, like, pure intensity or anger or joy. And the fact that he's able to, like, bring these really complex emotions just by his physicality and like the visual language of his eye, like I said, his eyes and mannerisms really says a lot about his character as someone, like you said, is very stoic and he's very to himself. But like when it's time to really like open up, he does open up, but it's mostly through like a very visual, representation of his character.
Exactly. We haven't even gotten into the action bits yet, which are incredible. Like the action set pieces in this film are insanely good.
And on a word on the action sequences, I think what's really great on what Winding Refn does with the way he sets up scenes is that when it comes to like the actual like crime itself, he never shows it to you. Like everything is very much so on like the imagination of the scenario happening, and all of it's like put on Ryan Gosling to like be the person who's constantly thinking about the dread and like the anxiety of the situation, which puts the audience member also in his shoes, where it's like, okay, we have 5 minutes, we gotta do this, we gotta do this. And even on like the action scenes themselves, I think it's kind of amazing how like almost realistic the violence seems. Like it's never like stylistic or put in a way that's supposed to be entertaining. It's like fast and it's brutal, and it never gives you the time to like really be satisfied by it. It always makes you uncomfortable. Like I think about the scene where Ryan Gosling was going into the female dancer room, and like he takes the hammer and bashes the mobster's hands in, and he has the bullet. Like that entire scene is so brilliant, because in any other movie, like all the women would be screaming and running around and trying to escape, but like they realize that this is just part of the job. Like this shit just happens. And it's kind of that like layer of realism that makes the scene way more engaging than had it been anyone else.
Exactly. I can't sing the praises of this film enough, It's like, I remember loving it, and then I was like, I wonder going back to it just for this video if I'll love it just as much. It's down slightly, but I'm still like really loving this film.
I actually came away liking it. I actually came away liking this film more than I originally thought, because I'm very into like visual storytelling in my films. I care more about like showing me rather than being told. So I think what makes this film great is, like I said, like how the film shows you action and how it shows you conversations without really doing a lot of words. And a lot of that goes into the driving sequences. Like there's a very like dream-like quality to this film.
Yes.
And like the scene where he's driving Irene and the kid around, and they're in the underpass and Real Hero plays. And there's a lot of like really bright colors, and like it's very sunny. And I think the way that scene like presents the very dreamlike atmosphere of like the driver finally has found happiness amidst all the like crime and like evil that he has to commit. And I think it's really well done by combining the music and the visual storytelling at play.
Absolutely. It's a hell of a scene. And I still think a lot of people, when they think of Drive, they still, any person I've talked to still thinks of A Real Hero. And for good reason. Like, that scene with that music cannot be understated of how good that scene is. Even if Zane Lowe tried to make something different and have the 1975 do as music track for a rescore, you're still not going to beat the original.
God, I just love how it's used in the ending too, where Ryan Gosling's just sitting in the car bleeding out, and it slowly comes into the scene as he drives away. So perfect. It's so perfect.
So perfect.
So Drive, of course, massive influence. And like I talked about, the way the action is so brutal and it's tight and it's very claustrophobic, that is a huge inspiration for one game by Devolver Digital known as Hotline Miami. Once again, Sam, the floor is yours.
Oh man, so yeah, released in 2012, if memory serves me correct. I believe it was digital only with I think a limited physical release back in the day. I remember picking this game up in 2012, looking at it going, heavily influenced by home PC sort of games that you would find on the Commodore Amiga. The top-down, like enemy rush, shoot-em-up games. Very similar to, this is me being really nerdy, similar to the Commodore Amiga game Alien Breed, in a sense. In fact, it was top-down and you were shooting things left, right, and center. Except this one was more and more violent than we could possibly imagine. And the whole, I think this is one of the very first games that brought up the the violence. This isn't violence for violence sake. Like, you know, you feel the toll on killing a lot of people. It is a gruesome game. It is a very violent game. There is a lot of stuff in certain scenes in the story that do make you feel uncomfortable, but push through and persevere. This is a hell of a game to play. And my gosh, the influence of the 80s cannot be overstated. So much neon, so much palm trees, so much musical stabs as well. And Hydrogen, who did a lot of the music OST for Hotline Miami, were all guns blazing. They did such a good job on this game.
Mm-hmm. I particularly love the track on level 8 where it's Perturbator. And it's in the disc. I think, is it the disco tech that
I
they're
believe
in?
so, yeah.
Like the dance hall that they're in, or the nightclub that they're in. And like that music is pulsating throughout the level. You're just going in and you're causing all this chaos. And I think what's really fascinating about Hotline Miami is that it's one of those games where like the soundtrack and the game can't be divorced. Like it's really hard to play this game on mute because there's an almost zen-like quality to the music which is driving you through the level, where it's almost like the music itself is like a gameplay feature where you kind of just like put yourself in the mode of like this contract killer that's going through these impossibly violent situations with all these different weapons.
It almost devolves almost into a rhythm game in how intrinsic the music is to the gameplay.
It really is. So do you have a favorite mask that you like using?
Ooh. Honestly, I will usually default to the chicken or the wolf mask. That's just me.
See, I personally like using the dog mask because dogs are like the most annoying enemies to face in this game. Because like it doesn't matter. Because it doesn't matter if you have like a melee weapon or if you can just punch it, it'll just one hit kill you, and it's so fast and it's so annoying that there were entire runs I'd have where I would do so well on clearing rooms, but then that dog would just show up like this in like a millisecond and I'd be done.
Did you just baiting them out for the door as well? That was my technique. Yeah, I baited them out. I was cheating and cheesing the game. Sue me.
No, but I mean, that's a legitimate strategy because like I'd have situations where I'd have the machine gun and I would just like pop it to make noise, bring someone over, kill them, pop it again. Some people would come over around the corner and I'd kind of just do that until like the scenario was over. Like, okay, next room. Or like I'd have a scenario where like I would only have a pipe. I would throw the pipe at the guy, then go into the other room, like knock the guy down, kick him in, and then go back, kick the guy again. He'd give me a gun. And then I do that scenario over and over again.
Yeah.
And a lot of it too, I think, is great. Is like there's a lot of experimentation to that game where you're not having the same run like multiple times, in the sense that like sometimes melee weapons are more important than actual firearms. Because like firearms will cause a lot of noise, but if you have something like, I don't know, a knife, the knife is really great in terms of like something that's really fast, it's really close range, and doesn't really cause a lot of noise. So you just like get in and get out of the room and go on to the next one without causing much, noise or like causing a lot of enemies to come at you.
I played it before we recorded as well, like a few days ago. And man, I was like, man, I have so much. I enjoy this game so damn much. So damn much. But I can't overstate enough, like, the story of the violent nature of the story. It's a bit harder once you have the full gravity of the situation. A lot of that, especially in the sequel, which again, that's another one I highly recommend. If you're gonna play Hotline Miami, play both of them, honestly. And those that are saying that Hotline Miami 3 is gonna happen, no. It's not going to happen.
Damn.
As much as I want there to be a third one, I think 1 and 2 just are so perfectly, such a perfect arc of a story there. No need to have a third one.
Mm-hmm.
Spoilers for the end.
Yeah, that's Hotline Miami. Excellent game, excellent story, excellent soundtrack. And of course, like that soundtrack definitely kind of finds itself inspirational for a lot of other games going forward, like Blood Dragon from Far Cry 3.
Gosh, shout outs to Power Glove for doing the soundtrack for that. I love the soundtrack for Blood Dragon.
I forget, did Power Glove? Is it Power Glove or?
I believe it is Power Glove, if memory serves me correct.
Is Power Glove also there? Okay. I'm forgetting that game a lot. I haven't played it in a long time, but but what I haven't forgotten about is 2015's Kung fucking Fury.
Let's go. Yeah.
So I'm going to be quick on this one because I just watched it recently. I think the best way to watch that film is to think of it less as an actual film, because let's be honest, the story of this thing is basically non-existent. It's just a procession of like, how can we have the coolest scene possible and then follow that up throughout like 40 minutes of a runtime. And a lot of this film is just like, how can we fit the most ridiculous violence, the most ridiculous one-liners, and build upon it until it reaches its crescendo. Like, I think one of my favorite scenes is when Kung Fury is in the Nazi compound and he's just like beating the shit out of dudes.
Yeah.
And
which, you know what? I'm not surprised. I think that's everyone's favorite scene.
Hey man. It's the power fantasy of just beating the shit out of countless Nazis. What more do you want? But the best part about that is that he's doing all this crazy violence and all this crazy like kung fu moves, but he just like does a crazy like martial arts dance and like 7 dudes just fall over themselves and just die. It's the best.
Yeah, it's so good. As I say to people, for me, Kung Fury is side-scrolling beat 'em up, the movie.
I mean,
every sense of the
essentially.
word. It's like like if you want to have a live-action Streets of Rage or a live-action Double Dragon final fight, just go watch Kung Fury, because that's pretty much it. And it makes me, this is an editor in joke as well, I feel like Kung Fury basically sold Red Giant VHS Universe to everyone. Because by golly, the VHS filters on that film.
That explains the laser raptors. Fuck. Also, the fucking fact that, so it's so funny that like Triceratops is like this Triceratops cop character who's supposed to be like the the stand-in buddy cop for Kung Fury, and there's basically absolutely no chemistry between them. And then at the end of the film, he's like, "You're like a brother to me," and it's such a cheesy trope that makes no sense, but like, because it's a trope of the time, you're just like, you know what? Yeah. Fuck it.
It would have been more of a trope if he said he was 2 days away from retirement.
Oh my god. Oh my god. So I'm trying to think, are there any other pieces of media that are pretty important to the synthwave genre? I guess we could talk about Stranger Things.
Yes, I feel like it would be remiss if we didn't at least mention or acknowledge Stranger Things. Of course, comes out in the mid-10s around 2015? 2015 or 2016? 2016. And takes like Netflix by storm of just the huge influence of John Carpenter and Stephen King and Michael Mann and all of those great directors of the 80s. Very much influenced by horror of the 80s, as evident by it. I've always had an appreciation for the series. I really did dig the first one when it came out in 2016. I mean, it hasn't diminished that much, but I feel like it's become a meme at this point to kind of wait 3 years and then realize, oh, Stranger Things is on, maybe I'll watch it. And then by the end of it, you go, yeah, all right, that was actually really good. But no, it's a strange one, pun intended, with Stranger Things. But I feel like we couldn't have not made a guide to Synthwave and not talk about the cultural impact that Stranger Things has kind of had on media in general.
Yeah, it is very important. I would say it is the series that kind of blows Netflix up into a worldwide phenomenon that it would be now. If I were to be very transparent and honest about Stranger Things, I think at its best, it was the most important thing in my life during a very rough period. Which is the first season. Like, I think the first season is genuinely some of the best television I've watched, like, ever. Like, the way that and what I love so much about the first season of Stranger Things, it's so truncated and it's so, like, small stakes that you really get a good like understanding of the characters. It's very character driven, and Winona Ryder is just fucking excellent in that.
So good.
She is. Oh my god, Winona Ryder is incredible, incredible. And like you said, like the whole mystery surrounding Will Byers and like how it becomes this grander, you know, conspiracy into like this other dimension where it becomes very Stephen King. And I love how it ends too, where it's very open-ended. And it doesn't really matter if there's a second season or not, but because it has that small thread of, well, maybe this happened, it's much better for it. Because it leaves you with a mystery of like, well, is this happening? Is this not happening? Season 2 is very hit or miss. There's one absolutely fucking awful episode that I think everybody agrees on. Right. It also has Samwise in it, so that's part of why I like Season 2. And then there's Season 3. Season 3, I will go on record as saying maybe some of the worst fucking television I have ever watched in my fucking life. It is horrendously bad. Shockingly
what, you
bad
didn't like the
television.
ball scenes by any chance, Andos?
Like, where do I start? It's this... It completely, like, takes away the small stakes, small town vibe that made it so unique and precious in the first place, and becomes this, like, grossly pro-capitalist, anti-communist, like, story where it becomes like, hey, do you remember the Terminator? Do you remember Back to the Future? And like the thing about Stranger Things that was so interesting was that the nostalgia was there and what they were referencing was there, but it was very much so like on its sleeve and kind of like brought up as like, yeah, we're bringing up the nostalgia. Like for example, the E.T. scene in season 1, like that was very much so tongue-in-cheek and that was very fun and that was a nice throwback. But it's like in season 3, it's like there's literally the Terminator. The Terminator is literally a character in Stranger Things, and people are literally going to see Back to the Future. And it's just, where did we go here? And then season 4 is so weird because like it's the highest of highs, especially with Eddie. The character of Eddie is like one of the best things the series has ever done.
Yep.
And of course the running up the hill scene, iconic. It's great. But like, and at its worst, of course it has to bring in the Soviets. Like everything about the Soviets is openly terrible.
No,
it's
you're
like,
right.
It's openly terrible because it has to make Hopper, who's like this pudgy everyman, who like a lot of people like, we like Hopper a lot because he's, like I said, the everyman, he's small time, he's very nice. Season 3 and season 4 transform him into this weird action hero where like he's fucking up like Soviet troops and guards and stuff and he's making his way all the way back to America. And it's like, it's so at odds of like what the series is. But against that is this super fascinating like small time story of like, we're understanding more about the Upside Down. We're understanding more about Eleven's past. And like all that with it, what's the name of the villain? Like Victor,
yes.
Vecna, incredible villain. Awesome villain.
Yes.
Very much so a Wes Craven nightmare type. Vibe with him.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
And like I said, the whole running up that hill bit is so good.
Hey, it got people into Kate Bush, so you know what? I'll give season 4 a pass just for that.
Exactly. Like that's my rant on Stranger Things. Like I said, very important to Synthwave. There's some really excellent stuff in Stranger Things, but you also have to go around like genuinely really bad stuff.
You have to sift through the bad stuff to get to the good stuff, and it's again, as I said, by the end of it, you go, "Oh, right, that was actually good. Can't wait for the next season in about 7 years."
It is,
time.
yeah. Where everyone's like in their 20s now and they're supposed to be
in junior high.
Junior high.
Other than that, there's 2 things that I definitely have to bring up in terms of influences that I do need to say, because I feel like I can't not say them in this video, and I'm so sorry for interrupting.
That's okay, go ahead.
So for me, I'm glad you brought up Vice City, because I was going to go on a long bit about that, but you did that for me, so thank you very much, sir. One that I feel never gets mentioned enough is 2010, December 2010, and Disney, in their infinite wisdom, finally finally make a sequel to Tron called Tron Legacy. I feel that, again, that has a huge importance. If anything, that was a spark that started to light the fuse, and then, of course, Drive happened. An amazing film. I will still defend Tron Legacy to my dying breath. It was a good film, everybody. I don't care what anybody else says. It's just a shame we're not getting a continuation of the story with Tron Ares. But less said about that, the better. There's another video packed in there for me to do there, Andos.
Just a classic story of Disney getting in their way.
Absolutely. And of course, something we'll get into as well when we're talking about theoreticals as well, I imagine. I don't think we can sit here and say and not talk about the impact that a certain song had on everyone. And that, of course, would be Home's Resonance. That song had a huge impact on social media, to the point where I think a lot of people were like, wow, I'm getting nostalgic over a time where I wasn't even born. But this thing is really freaking cool. As I said, I think we'll get into more of that as well, because it's not necessarily synthwave in its musicality and its kind of genre type, but needs to be brought up as a huge factor into the popularity of this genre.
And I'm glad that you mentioned like the more theoretical aspects of synthwave, because with that in mind, I think it's important when discussing synthwave that there's a lot of like at least 20 caveats I have to establish before getting into it, because I feel like a lot of people get confused when it comes to synthwave, and like they don't know, like, is this synthwave, is this synthwave? And I think for a lot of people call it synthwave in terms of like, you know, retrowave, future synth, outrun, retro synth, on top of like, you know, dark synth, chill wave, and all this stuff. And to alleviate any confusion, I'm just going to use synthwave as like an umbrella topic, an umbrella phrase, to like have all these different genres be considered, or ideas of what synthwave is, to be just synthwave, right? And of course, with all those characteristics in mind, and like the theoretics on like nostalgia and whatnot, one thing that I am very adamant about on what synthwave isn't is it's not vaporwave.
Correct.
Absolutely. And here's the thing. I totally understand the confusion, right? Like, I feel this is a common misconception, because people who get into synthwave have this idea of like, on a surface level, both are very rooted in giving the listener a deeply nostalgic listening experience and dealing nostalgic imagery, both within the 80s and sometimes in the 90s. And both genres of music are very hyper-focused on giving you a very specific vibe to their sound to make you feel the location and the setting of the song itself and the music of the instrumentation that it is presenting. But there are strict differences, and let me be clear, I love vaporwave. You know, I love Floral Shop, I love St. Pepsi, Luxury Elite, Flaminguas, all that, great. But first off, synthwave is more focused on including a lot of 90s nostalgia on top of like 80s nostalgia as well, with a lot of 90s web design, a lot of 90s video games and media. And sonically, in which of course like synthwave is strictly the 1980s. Like a lot of synthwave is strictly 1980s, whereas vaporwave will dabble in the 1980s, but a lot of the 90s is in there as well. And musically, vaporwave deals particularly in heavy sampling, whether that's like, you know, R&B, corporate, or smooth jazz, where those samples get heavily pitch shifted and stretch out throughout the track. And actually, a good example of this to compare and contrast to synthwave is St. Pepsi's Enjoy Yourself, which takes Michael Jackson's Off the Wall and manipulates its pitch, tempo, and layers to the track into something completely new. And also, vaporwave aesthetics have a much more bright and, dare I say, pastel scheme to them, whereas the outrun aesthetics that synthwave uses are much darker and have more contrast to them. Not to say that synthwave like doesn't deal in pastels and like light colors, but there's a lot more pastel and light color that you can find in vaporwave. Next, when it comes to vaporwave, I think it's important to establish that while both musically vaporwave and synthwave deal with nostalgia, I feel like musically vaporwave is far more satirical about its use of nostalgia. Like, it's very much so like being satirical about consumerism and capitalism on top of like giving you those feelings. And I feel like this is my theory on vaporwave, and this is a whole video in and of itself, but my feelings on vaporwave is that it kind of, the reason for the distortion, like the pitch shifting of a lot of the songs in vaporwave, is because it's giving you like a false idea of your nostalgia, in the sense of like, we're doing this because maybe your memory of the time you're in isn't as bright and as cheery as you remember it. So if we take this music that is bright and cheery and pop oriented and kind of like warp it and focus it differently, it gives you a better idea of like what, the 90s and the 80s and the 90s actually were.
Yeah, I mean, it definitely leans a lot more into distortion, white noise, a lot of VHS damage as well. So not to say that synthwave doesn't, because my golly, synthwave does have a lot of influence with VHS as well. I feel like IQ Wrestler should be counting royalty checks at the moment for the entire genre.
Honestly.
Shout out to IQ.
Shout out to IQ.
But yeah, like, honestly, it's that they are very different in the sense of what you meant. Like, vaporwave definitely is more satirical. Like, I can't picture synthwave using the elements of Mac Tonight or The Simpsons in a way that vaporwave does,
Mm-hmm. Right.
Without at least it kind of, we're not doing it seriously anyway. But no, I think that's the key difference, is that you can definitely tell that vaporwave is doing it for a sense of satire. Because how can you take? I mean, Simpsons Wave literally took the late 10s by storm in every sense. And you can't say that, I'm absolutely super serious about this. You can't, but you feel nostalgic as heck for it.
Honestly, yeah. And going back into synthwave, I feel that sometimes people will refer to synthwave as outrun. And in the research that I've done, and Nick Thaman on YouTube has a really good video on this that I highly recommend, where he describes outrun is the aesthetic that synthwave uses for its visual identity. It's not the music itself. And a good comparison is like, for example, let's use like Undertale, for example. Undertale has chiptune and it has pixel art. Chiptune is the music, pixel art is the art. The actual like aesthetic, where chiptune is the actual music.
Yes, yeah.
If that's a good comparison point.
I was wondering where you were going with Undertale, but you know what? No, good comparison. Good comparison.
I tried to think of a retro video game, and the only one I could think of was Undertale for some reason.
That's it. That works.
Yeah, but like both complement each other with a strong visual style and auditory energy within the work, but like independently, they're not one of the same. And of course, common outrun imagery is characterized by like neon, commonly magentas and teals, along like grand stretches of like symmetrical palm trees in the 80s computer grid, and what is referred to as the run sun, which is the sun in the very center, as it's kind of like multicolored in various colors.
Oh, and don't forget DeLoreans. Lots and
DeLoreans?
lots of DeLoreans.
Not just DeLoreans, but a lot of like Ferraris, a lot of Trans Ams, cars are a very strong visual aesthetic of outrun.
Absolutely. And it's all 80s. Like all 80s model cars. Like I don't ever see like a Nissan GTR there. No, I will always find like Ferrari Testarossa, Lamborghini Countach, DeLorean.
Mm-hmm.
That's the I swear to God, those are the three main ones.
The big three, very much so. Okay, and finally, I feel this is going to be in the more like video essay of it all in discussing synthwave, but I think a common criticism of synthwave is that it feels like when it comes to synthwave, a lot of it is like, oh, you're just worshipping empty nostalgia, you're worshipping all the greatness of the 80s. And I feel that when it comes to synthwave as like a musical assertion in a musical theory that it's not so much saying, oh, look at how great the 80s were. It was mostly on like how great the 80s made you feel, right?
Man, on an artistic level, the 80s was a huge high for humanity in what we were creating. Not just in music, but just in films, TV, comic books, cartoons. Everything was just hitting on a high. And it wasn't just the West. Over in the East as well, in Japan especially, there was a huge boom period in the 80s for anime. I mean, from that period, we had Akira, which was the biggest anime release that Japan ever had up until that point. So I feel like it harkens back to me when I listen to it, as a person who never grew up in the 80s, by the way, of a time where it was like harkening back to a huge high in creativity. That's where the nostalgia for me comes from, but also, and a phrase that gets bandied around quite a bit, especially with the midnight, a Japanese phrase known as mono no aware, translated to a pathos of things. And I feel like that is the perfect description of what synthwave is. A longing for it's like a longing for a time where everything was really cool, everything was like high, everyone was really like up on their A game with creativity. I'm using that word again. I feel like I've said creativity so many times, but no, that's it though. That's how I felt about it and the genre. Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's great that you mentioned that phrase too, because I think when it comes to synthwave, it's in celebration of like the fact that like, I think when it comes to nostalgia, it's not so much like, look at how great this was. Wasn't this always great? It was being like, this is great, and it just happens to be from this time period. Like, there's an appreciation that these things exist within the time period that they were created in. And like you said, with the 1980s, it was such, there'll never be a time like it, because it felt like this giant explosion of creativity, where like everything was being thrown against the wall, and like whether it stuck or not, you could appreciate like how wild and how hard everyone was going into like creating their own identity, whether that be, music or film or animation. And I think that's why nostalgia for the 80s is like so strong and so different as opposed to like nostalgia from, say, the 70s or the 90s, was because it was just so free and it was just so like unrestrained and almost celebrated in the sense that like if you got weirder, if you got more experimental, if you got more like unique and pushed the boundaries more, the more celebrated you were for it. And like that was such fertile ground of like, this had never been seen before, as opposed to like, things felt so restrained in like the 60s and the 70s. But now that we're in a period where things are, I don't want to say like more liberal, because that's the wrong phrase to use, but like in terms of like things that are just like more, I just totally blanked. I'm sorry.
I would say more sterilized, maybe, in a sense.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And once again, kind of going into like the impermanence of it, you go into like the more experimental subgenres and the different subgenres of synthwave, where it's like there's dark synth and there's these artists who are taking the sounds of the 80s and they're making them a lot more evil and they're making them a lot more serious, which is a better reflection of like, the science fiction and the cyberpunk and like the very crime and fantasy oriented scenes that I'll definitely talk about. But I think what's interesting too is that it's not just the nostalgia that makes synthwave interesting. It's interesting how like, and I'll ask you this question straight up. Do you think that synthwave as an artistic expression has meaning beyond the nostalgia? And if so, is that so much a bad thing?
I genuinely think it does, because I find now, even more so nowadays, with the modern pop landscape as it is, that there are a lot more production techniques that are being kind of used that were back then. Like, I listen to so many artists in the pop genre that are usually breaking into the top 40 or the top 200, wherever you are in the world, that are using those techniques, and it's really resonating with a lot of people. Like, off the top of my head, Sabrina Carpenter, Chapel Roan, Dua Lipa, The Weeknd, They're all
Of course.
using techniques and instrumentations and synthesizers in their songs, and it's hitting. And it is doing more so than I feel like any genre or any time period of pop. It's great because for the longest time, pop felt very stale. And now we're in a point where it's feeling very just as creative as music that was coming out in the 80s. And that's really cool to see. And to say like synthwave, yeah, the huge hook is the nostalgia, the longing of a time period that seemed so out there and so magical for a lot of people. To everyone watching, my eldest brother was born in the 80s. My parents grew up in that time. It wasn't that great.
No.
For a lot of people. But no, the fact that it's kind of coming full circle as well in terms of creativity. Yeah, it's more. I feel like synthwave is more than just the nostalgia nowadays.
I think it's interesting that you mentioned that how the 80s like weren't this magical time, and I feel like that hardship also kind of translates towards, if things are hard, we have to make art to like make these things to get through the everyday. Because you think about in the 1980s, there was a lot of civil unrest where like a lot of companies were moving overseas and these big cities were being abandoned, and there was a lot of like social unrest, and like all the money that was being focused in were on these big mega corporations that like gave way to things like ideas of cyberpunk. And you take Ronald Reagan now, change the name to Donald Trump, change the mega corporation of then to the mega corporation of now, and you see a bunch of like, and it's interesting that like everything comes full circle, because all the like misery of like a Trump election and things like degrading socially and economically and environmentally, you have a lot of art that's kind of meeting that in terms of like, we are taking a look at the world and we are making art that reflects this and like says something about it. And that's what the 80s did. And that's what makes the 80s so fascinating compared to any other decade, was that kind of like social, political, and economic uncertainty of like, oh my God, like, are we all gonna die tomorrow through nuclear annihilation? Through art that kind of like represented the fears and like the hopes and the anxieties of the time, that could be like really upbeat or really scary or really like emotional and inspirational. And I think being able to see the 80s then translate that feeling to now, we're seeing a lot of art that's like reflecting that. Yeah.
I know people bally on about the 30-year theory, about like people making art from 30 years prior, like 80s it was the 50s, and a lot of people were thinking with the 10s it's the 80s and it'll have its course. I don't think we're done with the 80s nostalgia just yet, because the way the world is at the moment, it is a mirror. It is literally a mirror flip of the 1980s.
It really is, yeah. Right. So this is all this long-winded ramble to say that I think synthwave is very important now, because the 80s are being more reflected in today's current like global climate than it ever was in any other decade following the 80s.
Absolutely.
All right, so here comes the big chunk of the video. We've preambled for a long time. We've talked about the progenitors, we've talked about the history, we've talked about the theory of synthwave, but it's now about the music, my friend. Let's talk about the music.
And I feel like we can't do this. We can't do this without doing it properly. We've talked about nostalgia. We've talked about synthwave at verbatim. We've talked about the 1980s. So I reckon we need to do this right. And I reckon, well, in my nerdiness, well, we need to do it this sort of way.
This is Andos Television, ATV in stereo. I'm your VJ Andos, along with VJ Sam, as we count down the top 10 albums you should listen to. When you told me your picks for this section, I was incredibly excited about it, because I feel like you and I are very different in terms of like what we get out of synthwave. Like the way we view synthwave as a genre is very unique to ourselves, and I think the music really represents that. So first off, I will let the floor to you. Do you have any honorable mentions?
Wow. Literally everyone I won't get to mention. So acts like Miami Nights 1984, The Motion Epic, Jesse Fry, everyone that has come and gone from NewRetroWave, which is if I need to make a recommendation for a channel, go watch NewRetroWave. They will upload everything there. Dance with the Dead. Shout out to them for doing the Outrunners theme. And everyone else that I'm probably can't, like off the top of my head, I can't recommend, because it is such an expansive genre that is so malleable in what it can do and what it can produce out of it, that I felt really guilty omitting a lot of people, a lot of entries and a lot of bands from my picks. But I ultimately went with picks that I think will be the greatest gateway to get someone who really doesn't know much about the genre into the genre. So that's my honorable mentions.
Awesome. In terms of honorable mentions, it was so hard because I have so many artists that run the gamut of like what I enjoy from synthwave. And the first I want to shout out is the group Magic Sword. I mean, in the face of evil, what can you say about it? Excellent, very cinematic, fantasy-based synthwave that I just really didn't have a spot for on my list. Also, Miami Nights 1984. Again, they're great. Ocean Drive, classic, stone cold classic in the genre. Love it. Perturbator, Dangerous Days. You know, also really great dark synth. Who else? Who else am I leaving out? And of course, you probably have them on your list, and I'm kicking myself for not having them, but Kavinsky's Outrun. But the reason why I didn't put it on, I love Kavinsky, but I feel like that's the obvious pick to put on your list. It's almost like having a punk rock list and being like, oh, I'm going to put Ramones self-titled. Like, that kind of goes without saying.
Great segue, because, because I might have one of those of mine. It might even be the first one.
Oh, all right. Lay it on me, brother.
So first pick for my album, for albums that you must listen to, is Outrun by Kavinsky. Now, fun little story about this, as we were setting this up. Me and Andos, funnily enough, both picked Time Cop 1983 for our lists. Spoilers.
We did. Spoiler alert.
But the funny thing is, as we were going through, we were kind of going through the thing, and I was like, oh, I've picked this. Oh, well, I've also picked an album from Time Cop. Oh, okay, cool. Oh, wait a minute. We haven't mentioned Kavinsky in any of our lists. I was like, no, I feel that it's a crime to not mention.
It is, in fairness,
to not mention Kavinsky. So I sacrificed my Time Cop entry to give it to Outrun. Not sacrifice, because anything. I think Kavinsky kind of just shoved his way into there in every sense of the word, and rightly so. So, had to be the father of all synthwave, and that's why on second listening I chose Outrun by Kavinsky. So, even in this video, what hasn't already been said about the man and his work? I'll go over a brief history. Born in 1975, he got his start, funnily enough, as an actor before moving into the world of DJing and French house, with encouragement and inspiration from two of his friends and fellow artists, Jackson and his computer band, and Mr. Oizo. With a beat-up old Apple computer that Mr. Oizo donated to Kavinsky, he worked to get his musical chops down. That, of course, resulted in his debut EP, Teddy Boy, in 2005, and his first hit, Testarossa Autodrive. Gathering inspiration from his love of 80s films and TV, funnily enough, in an interview with Big Stereo, he said that he claimed to have watched over 10,000 movies, and a high concept that introduced to the bigwigs at record makers about a zombie with a Ferrari looking for his girlfriend. That is when Kavinsky was born. Oh, I also forget to mention, this zombie in question has a big Johnson.
What superpowers does Kavinsky have?
No one.
just a big dick.
3 more EPs would follow up, and he'd finally provide us with his first album, Outrun, a combination of his tracks from EPs as well as new songs. Man. So why I love this album so much is, again, as I said, he is the father of all synthwave, and it shows in every single one of his tracks from this album. It oozes style. It's a loose concept as well of a zombie looking for his girlfriend after he kind of passed away and she's forgotten all about him. More so that comes into play in some of his in his 2 music videos, Protovision and Odd Look. But I feel that comes into play a lot with Nightcall, funnily enough, when you realize the kind of like the inspiration behind the concept of the album, and that song in particular kind of makes more sense. So it works there, but it also works in Drive, which is terrific songwriting, if you ask me, from Kavinsky.
It really is. Also, I love the music video for Odd Look.
Absolutely. It's such a
awesome
good music video.
I
love as well, because it's such early days in the world of synthwave, that he had a lot more freedom to really dip his toes into doing different musical stylings from different genres. So not like something you would hear nowadays in many synthwave artists, he did delve into doing a bit more hip hop into his work and his music, and I think it works, honestly. A lot of rock, a lot of hip hop, a lot of synth and electronic 80s things, and collected together, it makes for a hell of an album. Obviously, my favorite tracks would be Odd Look, for obvious reasons, Protovision, not because of Joey Janela, even though he kind of made it even more of his own brand, so can't fault Joey for using it as his entrance theme. Suburbia featuring Havoc, great one. I really do like that song. And of course, it would be remiss for me to say that Nightcall featuring Love Fox isn't my favorite song on the album.
Of course,
because
of
it
course.
is. So that's my first pick.
I think it's really interesting that you brought down the track list, because I feel like when people talk about Kavinsky, it's always Nightcall, but if you go into his album, there's a lot of really strong deep cuts in that thing. Like you said, Blizzard is an awesome track.
So
And
good.
then you have Protovision, Odd Look, just really great songs up and down the track list. And like you said, it really is this interesting like snapshot into what synthwave kind of would be, because it's kind of figuring itself out with, like you said, a lot of hip hop, a lot of rock. It doesn't know what it wants to be yet, but the fact that he's experimenting with all these different sounds makes that album way more unique than like what would be standard with synthwave.
Exactly. Such a good album.
It's very good, yes. Like I said, I totally recommend it. Not on my list. Okay, so before I introduce my first pick, I need to establish how I set up my list. Like, you were very much so like, these are the albums that I just love in no particular order. I kind of wanted to go through like a spectrum where it's going through, here's the most like dreamy, chilled out, very light, very ethereal type music. This is the, your parents should not be finding out about this in the animated section of the video store type music.
Right.
The
Bob and
so
Dad
like very
section.
much so left-hand side of intensity, John Hughes. Right-hand side, the anime that you were told not to watch when you were a kid, but somehow watched it anyway.
Shout out to Wicked City.
That Wicked City, Devil City Shinjuku, Demon City Shinjuku, Ninja Scroll, that type beat. So in that, my first pick is a little album called Journeys by Timecop 1983 from 2014. I feel like if your interpretation of synthwave is strictly its aesthetics and visual components, this album was designed for that. Like, it was designed to be that, you know, run sun, neon colors, vast computer grid, sports car. I feel like if your idea of synthwave is like the very nostalgic, dreamy like qualities, this is a perfect start, because it's less an album you think about like sonically or musically, and more something you just like close your eyes to and let the very ethereal and dreamlike qualities just take you on that serene and endless ride. And I feel this is best represented in tracks like Lost Again, Visions, LA Nights, and the title track that combines these layer of twinkly, drawn-out synths and light, repetitious bass that generate very wistful feelings of like long, endless summers and under the glow of city neon lights, or of memories that you never or would want to have. But I think the most standout quality of the album is the very way it establishes those very unique and ethereal atmospheres through its use of very hazy vocal tracks, particularly with the track Dreams with Dana Jean Phoenix and Lost in Your Eyes featuring Pin Ronald. And with the very hypnotic repeats of the formers, There Is No Turning Back, and the Lost in Your Eyes, latter of Lost in Your Eyes, of course, being these very wistful deliveries of love and passion that add this layer of romantic melancholy that I think adds into the very nostalgic and beauty of impermanence that the synthwave nostalgia is very much so trying to go for. And of course you'd find that in groups like The Midnight or FM 84, but when it comes to Time Cop, I feel like it's the most I feel those nostalgic aspects, and those aspects be the most dreamlike, like I said, due to the composition of the songs being so focused on those deep emotions, be it the tempo of the synths or the undercurrent of that repetitive bass and the hazy vocals, all combining to have this very hypnotic experience. You just manifest a visual of you on that long neon highway, the person you love most cuddled on your shoulder, and the feeling that that summer's never gonna end.
Say it better myself.
But yeah, that's on the more like very light, dreamlike quality, which leads into your second pick, Sam. What do you got for me?
I'm very glad you were talking about Endless Summers in a sense, because look, come on, my second pick, of course, Endless Summer.
There we
by
go.
The Midnight.
There we go.
Look, if anyone knows me, they knew full well that there was going to be a Midnight album on the list. and honestly, it would have been a crime to not include them in some way. As they are one of the most successful bands in the entire genre. Millions and millions of people listening to their albums and their songs on YouTube and Spotify. Countless sold out tours, vinyl pressings of all of their albums. So glad I got this one. They're so start to get sometimes. They are time. To me, they are just one of the absolute best bands. The problem I had was which one do I pick from their discography? Because honestly, they have such a strong discography for a band. Do I pick Days of Thunder? Do I pick Nocturnal? Do I pick anything from the Kids trilogy or any of the EPs like The Horror Show or the orchestral one, Rearview Mirror? Ultimately, I went for the first album, Endless Summer, because I feel, as I say, I feel like it's like the greatest gateway into the genre. But before I sing the praises, before I go into it and sing the praises, do a little history. How did Tim and Tyler meet? Well, both men were established artists before they ever crossed paths together. Tim McEwan was an accomplished Danish producer, writing and producing for many artists in his native country, as well as the UK. Mostly every pop group and boy band that you have listened to that came from the UK, most notably or most likely, had something written or produced by Tim McEwan. Heck, he was such a mainstay for the Danish music scene that he ended up helping out and becoming part of the backing bands for the Denmark entries for the 2009 and 2011 Eurovision Song Contest.
Yeah, nice.
Specifically for the acts known as Brink and A Friend in London. There is actually footage of a young Tim McEwan on drums in the 2009 Eurovision Song Contest, and it's an absolute fever dream because I think of Tim from The Midnight, not bald Tim in the Eurovision Song Contest. So, as for Tyler Lyle was born in Georgia, and he grew up in a musical household and only picked up the knack for music in high school. mostly because he was in his church choir, and mostly he had no interest. After that, he had no interest in music, and it was only when he got into college that he decided to finally pick up a guitar and start playing. But quickly from that, he showed his prowess for crafting incredible vocals and lyrics in the folk genre. He would go on to release The Golden Age and The Silver Girl, which is something you should definitely listen to, as it shows the early signs of what Tyler would provide lyrically for the Midnight. So it was a chance meeting in 2012 in a writing workshop in Los Angeles that Tim and Tyler met and immediately hit it off, talking about their passion for 80s rock and roll, and of course, as we've said it many a time before, the film Drive. From that workshop, they would craft two songs, We Move Forward and Gloria, both appearing on the debut EP, Days of Thunder. After the release of that EP, they both began working and making what would become their debut album, of which was inspired by Tim watching the 1966 surf documentary, The Endless Summer. From a Reddit AMA, he said, and I quote, "It gave me this yearning for a summer never to end. And when I asked Tyler to try and write over this track idea I had, he was really inspired and it felt just right. And then it's certainly a way to really encapsulate the feelings of what this genre does for you. I mean, let's be honest, haven't we all had that period of time where it was so perfect that you just wish it never have ended?"
Mm-hmm.
And so,
all the time.
That for me is perfectly encapsulated in this album. It is such a strong album from start to start that it is just, it harkens that feeling of nostalgia. As we said, the pathos of things, a longing for a summer or a winter or any time period of the year that you really loved and enjoyed and never wanted it to end. This collection of songs perfectly captures that feeling in a way I've never felt before. It is, man, I could go on. I'm going to go on forever. I'm sorry, Andos. You might have to bring me in for a little bit. But if I'm going to pick tracks in particular, the whole freaking album. No, I did manage to actually narrow it down to a select few. Sunset, which is track, I think it's track 2. Let me just, I was right, yeah, it's track 2. Sunset is such an amazing second track to really get into, like, to really have the standpoint, like the need for this album about an endless summer down. Perfect. Jason, featuring Nikki Flores in what would be one of her first collaborations with The Midnight, is such a great song, and it is, to quote Tim and Tyler, absolutely a love song about Jason Voorhees, which I just think makes it even funnier and makes it even more awesome. Synthetic is such one of my favorite Midnight songs, and it is such an amazingly slow heartbreak ballad. But I think the real amazing thing about it is that it's one of 2 songs that Tim has provided lead vocals for. And Tim, if you are watching, you need to do more, and you don't be so anxious about singing, because you've got a hell of a singing voice, sir.
He really does.
The Comeback Kid it's a great, what would I call 80s montage of a teenage coming of age drama song. And it is one of those songs when you listen and see them live that really unites the entire crowd together. It's such like an upbeat, amazing, we can take on the freaking world, forget what's going on outside and what's happened to you, your year or your day. I will take on the world, and I've got an entire auditorium or arena of people believing me in that. Vampires, for just one of the best sax solos in a synthwave song. A great one. And of course the end track, Memories, which again is the end credits to a coming of age drama, and honestly a great ending to an endless summer, in a sense of the summer's now, the nights are rolling in, summer's now finished. Everyone's gone off to do, go to college or go back to their jobs, to their real life. But this time period, the things we created, the things we did will always stick with me and then stick with you. Man, I love this. I'll even recommend the 5th anniversary edition that included 2 tracks that were omitted from the album, Bend and Comet, which is the second song that Tim wrote and provided vocals for. Both great songs as well. Andos, you gotta stop me, because I will keep going on.
So what I will say is that I'm not as big into the midnight as you are. I appreciate the passion, though, of the passion. The way you're describing it to me is, I think, something that's also unique to Synthwave is that the way they use the sounds of the 80s with the instrumentation kind of like craft their own narratives within the albums themselves. And like what you're describing is, like I said, it sounds like a John Hughes film, but with synths.
Yes, absolutely.
That's awesome. That's awesome. All right. So I do have to stop you there, regrettably, because my next pick is Comtrue's Galactic Melt 2011.
What a pick. What a pick.
Thank you. So Seth Haley, who is the real-life Comtrues, is a self-professed computer nerd and synth nerd. And what makes that really interesting in that like experimentation with his synths and his computers is that I feel that I might be overstating my limits here and talking about it as a synthwave album, but I think he himself considers himself a synthwave artist and like a slow funk type sound. And why I picked this album is that I think it best represents the level of diversity that synthwave as a genre can produce to make sounds that are much more unique than I think a lot of the artists that we've picked tend to do, to the point where you could say it's like, oh, this is just like EDM, this is IDM, this is whatever kind of electronic music that you think. But despite the fact that the man considers himself a synthwave artist, I feel like outsiders looking in on the synthwave genre would criticize the genre for being limited in its musical and sonic approach, being so focused on having 80s instruments to create strictly 80s sounds, where I think that Comtrues is so unique in the sense that he stands as someone who's very experimental in the way that he establishes the instrumentation of the 80s, be it the drum machines, be it the synths, to create something that's less interested in using those instruments to create a music that sounds like the 80s, and more on using that instrumentation to craft something new and to create worlds that are far more different than the 80s could ever produce. And you can really feel that ideology and what he brings into his music from every track here, through how just diverse the synths and the drum machines are, whether his synths are upbeat and fun and Cathode Girls and Ether Drift, or sludgy and dense and Aircal and Flightwave, to more ominous and dreary like in the opening of Terminal or VHS Sex. Actually, funny story about VHS Sex, I remember watching TV and there was like a perfume commercial or some type of like fashion commercial, and VHS Sex was playing, and I lost my mind. I was like, of all the tracks you could put into that kind of commercial, of course it's VHS Sex. Of course. And like even spacey and ambient, like in Hyperlips. But it isn't just the synths that really bring out how unique the sound is on this album, because Comtrues will also play with really glitchy audio and distorted and robotic vocal passages in tracks like Terminal, VHS Sex, and Broken Date, which gives the album an additional layer of very retro-futurism intrigue. Like, the world Comtrues is creating is this really artificial and digital landscape that exists within a computer or a very highly advanced civilization, where even the drum machines that he implements into the mix are really thought out to complement all the sounds that he adds to create this fascinating wall of sound that in equal parts feels nostalgic and futuristic and cinematic, where you can tell Comtrues is making music less about the vibe and the feeling of synthwave, and more like he's creating these really vast science fiction stories in these scientific worlds through the music that he creates. Like, it's very less like I'm creating worlds that are, Blade Runner or Akira, and more like Mobius paintings, if that makes sense, where they're very just like heady. They're very heady sounding, and they're very like unique in the way that they're visually representing themselves, to where I think it really challenges your interpretation of synthwave very much so. Because if it's limited to just like, oh, it's just trying to sound like the 80s again, this album really challenges the listener to think differently about synthwave and what it can represent as a musical expression, where if you give it a chance and you're able to like go through the different songs that he's implementing with like the synths and the drum machines, I think you'll find this to be one of the more rewarding albums that we recommend today.
Absolutely. And again, it comes back to what I said earlier about there can be so many facets to this one micro genre. None other genre, I don't think, ever has, that you can pull in from so many different influences, but it's still being synthwave.
Mm-hmm.
And Galactic Melt does that in spades. It's such a good album.
I love the album so much. And it's funny because I remember listening to Broken Date for the first time on like a Toonami advert and being like, what is this? I think it was like an advert for like all the different anime that they were showing for like the late night block. And the opening passage of like, the beach is at the place to really pick up girls, and like being like, what the hell is this? It was so unique and different from like all the other synthwave I was listening to that it stands out as like something super experimental and different, to where it's like, it's the 80s, but it's the 80s of something that like you have no idea about, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
All right. So Sam, what is your next pick?
My next pick. We've mentioned it a couple of times, and again, I'm getting far too excited with each pick I'm picking, but I had to pick Atlas by FM84.
Great album.
I get to talk about FM84 in great detail now, and it's such an interesting story into Cole himself. So, FM84 is the brainchild of one Colin Bennett, a Scottish graphic designer and synth pop extraordinaire that was originally based in California around the time of his work in Atlas. Now, his work in graphic design spans any and every sort of corporation you can think of. Most notably, he did a lot of design work for Apple in the early 10s to mid 10s. So basically, all of the great Swift design stuff mostly came from Cole Bennett.
Nice.
So he originally started music as a hobby, believe it or not. As stated in his 2015 interview with Verlingo, I've been making music as a hobby for the longest time, but I just haven't released anything until now. So with a huge early love for acts like Tears for Fears, Tangerine Dream, and Yang Hammer, combining that with his formative years in the 90s progressive house and electronica scenes, he came to start his music career in the early 10s with what would be known as FM84, and what is, in my humble opinion, the best synthwave song ever created. But before I get into my thoughts about my favorite songs and that sentence in particular, I actually just want to say this to Cole, if he is watching. He's been releasing songs and EPs since Atlas's release in about 2015, and he has mentioned a few times over the past kind of couple of years that he's been wanting to get a second album out and is probably currently working on this. Cole, if you're watching, know that I still listen to Atlas on an almost regular weekly basis, and that you returning to music will be so darn welcomed by everyone who loves synthwave. So, man, why do I love this album? Cole really does implement a lot of his loves, as I said, things like Tears for Fears, Tangerine Dream, Yang Hammer, into this album. The musicality of it as well, and some of the lyricism and some of the guest spots he has in working with people like Time Cop 1983 and Josh Daly, Clive Farrington, and of course the person we're going to talk about a lot for this that I think really put this album, skyrocketed it, was Mr. Ollie Ride. It's just such a huge, like a great 80s pop album, and then you come out of it and realize, oh, my goodness, that was released in 2015. That was freaking awesome. Can I have some more of it, please? Cole has just an amazing way of being able to produce songs that definitely hit that. There is a certain part of nostalgia, I think, in certain synthwave songs that really hits you in that feeling of nostalgia and really puts a pit in your stomach. And there is a lot in this album in particular, and of all of his songs in his production, that really does that for me. So, talking of the favorite songs from this album, the opening Everything is probably one of my most played songs on rotation on Spotify. It's not even funny. It's such an amazing instrumental, layering a lot of synths and synth lines into it. It's such a great opener. Let's Talk, featuring Time Cop 1983 and Josh Daly. Goodbye, featuring Clive Farrington, which was the end track. Arcade Summer, which is a really nice upbeat instrumental, featuring a lot of chip tune in there as well. But we have to talk about Running in the Night, featuring Ollie Ride, the second song on the album. And honest to goodness, for me, this humble person's opinion, quite possibly one of the greatest synthwave songs ever written. It is a simple love ballad song, and it is, in its lyricism, it is very kind of like very lovey-dovey, very Human League-esque in its lyricism and production. But my God, does it fill me and hit me with that nostalgia and that pit in my stomach so much. I can't recommend it enough. I don't want to sing the praises of it enough, because I'm very much of a thing of go listen to it. There is a reason why that song is currently sitting at, I think, 20 million listens on both YouTube and Spotify, because it's just such a damn good song. And Ollie Ride as a singer is incredible. Wild Ones as well, I want to mention that, which was the second song featuring Ollie on the album. Is an incredibly great song, and for me, feels like that could be featured on the Goonies soundtrack, of how good and how nostalgic that song is as well. So yeah, that's my next pick there. I've got that wave of nostalgia hitting me, so I think I might stop there.
That's why I wanted this video. Although I will say, I love Running in the Night. Running in the Night, great track, one of the best. Never Stop is better.
No, he's not. The thing is, I can't fault you for that, because Never Stop is an incredible song as well. I just feel
I think part of that too is the new retrowave music video that they made for it, where it's just like all 80s for like 3 minutes. And it fits so well too.
So damn well.
Never gonna stop. Oh, so catchy.
So good.
Yeah, but thank you so much for telling me that, because my next one, I think we've been talking about a lot of nostalgia. I think we've been talking about a lot of really light, really warm tracks. You know, I think that's really nice. But if you know anything about the 80s, it's all about the cars, right? We love those cars. We love those Tessarosas. We love those Pontiacs. So why don't we take those mean machines? Let's take those sports cars. Let's push them past the damn red line, because my next pick is 2010's Red Line by Laserhawk.
Let's go.
So in my past picks, I had a lot of like talking about, oh, this is why the music's good. This is a lot of theory of why I think the music's good. This is just all bangers. This album is Miami Vice, the soundtrack. If you thought that everything else I've talked about previously was like soundtracks to a John Hughes film, like I said, this is all the unofficial Miami Vice soundtrack. Whether it's just the engine revving title track to the foot on the gas overdrive to the pounding street chase anthem, pedal to the metal, every track here is all about taking that long night drive into danger with the coolest and baddest sports car. Like, when I listen to this album, my shitty Nissan Sentra transforms into a Ferrari F40. True story, true story. But my personal favorite track is the ridiculous, and I mean just ridiculously sexy Electric Groove, which straight up, like, that's DTF music. Like, I'll just leave it at that. That track fucks, okay? Electric Groove just fucks. But I think it's in the more lower tempo tracks like Distress Signal or So Close that show Laserhawk's ability to know how to pace an album on when to let off the gas and just cruise above like between the foot on the gas, rubber burning ragers. Even more mid-tempo tracks like Space Trash and The Fix have this pulsating energy to them that just conjures up images of Miami Vice like night drives that make you like really want to get into your car and just like drive for a half hour or so. And while not related to this album in general, I think what makes Laserhawk really fascinating as an artist is that he likes to dabble a lot into different subgenre, whether that's the very chill wave experience of Dream Rider in 2017 to more brooding dark synth with the 2013 album Skull and Shark. But Redline, I think this album is all about making synthwave just as fucking cool as possible and just as adrenaline pumping as it can be, designed to elicit high-speed car chases and pushing as hard as you can against the limits of machine and man. Pedal to the metal, push it past the red line.
Damn, I love Laserhawk so much. I'm so glad Laserhawk got a mention on this video.
I could not put him in there.
Oh,
I love Laserhawk so much. Actually, can I share a funny story about Laserhawk?
Floor's yours, go for it.
Okay, so this had to have been 2013 when I started getting into synthwave officially. And late at night, there was a Toonami advert for Space Dandy. And during the beginning of Space Dandy, it had King of the Streets from Skull and Shark opening. And like, it's not enough that there's like a synthwave track that's playing over a Shinichiro Watanabe anime. Halfway through the commercial in the advert is I Turned Into a Martian by the Misfits. So not only is it Shinichiro Watanabe anime, not only is it synthwave, but it's hardcore punk, which is like the most Andos core thing you could have ever shown me.
That's the holy trinity of Andos right there.
The holy trinity of me. Like that series is made for me with that advertising. All right, so enough gushing about that. Sam, what is your next pick?
Next pick, number 4. A more modern sort of pick for me here, as I decided to pick Nightlife by Sunglasses Kid. We now move to a synthwave act that has taken Instagram and TikTok by storm, and you know what? I can understand fully why. So, Sunglasses Kid, he is a British producer, composer, and electronic musician who fully embodies the vibe of nostalgia, whilst melding that with a sense of modern sensibilities. He got his start with his debut EP, Unpredictable, in 2013, and followed that up with his debut album Graduation in 2015 and Sophomore in 2020, solidifying him as a staple name in the genre. Not only that, but he does have a bunch of composing credits to his name, with work on Friday the 13th, The Game, Cobra Kai Season 6, and he worked with composer for Top Gun Maverick, Lorne Balfe, and that legendary sweaty muscle man sax player Tim Capello on the track Axel Return for 2024's Beverly Hills Cop Axel F. Which, by the way, go watch it. It actually is I was really surprised of how good Beverly Hills Cop Axel F really was and how much they really remained true of this being a film from the 80s. And we're going to stick to being like it in the 80s.
Hell yeah.
So, the reason for this album in particular is simply, like, I could have picked a lot of stuff from his discography, but this one is purely instrumental. And I feel it really exemplifies what Sunglasses Kid does. He has the mentality of like using synths, drum machines and samplers from the 80s, using that tech, but really giving it a modern songwriting sense. And I love it so much. To me, this is like with very similar to Redline, driving music. 80s montage driving music is what nightlife is in every sense. And man, I love it. From everything from the opening track, Red Shoes, which is very kind of like a dark, sultry synth type beat, kind of like promiscuous sort of vibe that goes to it. Falling in Love at the Drive-In, which again very to the numbers, romantic getaway, kind of going to the pictures, going to the multiplex. Broke Down Love is one of my personal favorites in the sense that I just think it's such an amazingly well put together song with its guitars, the beds of synthesizers in there. It's just the feeling of, again, it does evoke a feeling of romance to it and love to it. There is a great video on YouTube that someone actually edited clips of Jennifer Connelly to that song, which will always get me. God damn it, Jennifer Connelly. And the end song, Desert Prom, which is again a really kind of really nice montage style, low-key, romantic synthwave song. Cannot recommend this one enough. I can't recommend Sunglasses Kid's entire discography enough, actually. He is so got what synthwave is about, but also not knowing that he has to be beholden to being very much like the 80s, that he can take a Yamaha DX7 and go, all right, I can use this, but I can now use the modern sensibility of using this synthesizer. Really cool. I'm really looking forward to seeing what he does. He just released another album as of a few weeks ago called Internal Affairs, which is basically taking all of his like crime TikTok videos that he did and now making an entire album out of that. Looking like it's such a good one. Can't recommend Sunglasses Kid enough, honestly.
Nice. I've never heard of him, actually.
He's really good. Like, so good.
So, grab the mop and bucket. It's time to gush. Next pick. And I mean, this is where we go from John Hughes film to Miami Vice episode to John Carpenter film. Because what conversation can you have about synthwave without talking about the King of Dark Synth himself, Frank Husso, aka Carpenter Brute. And this is his 2015 compilation album, Trilogy. Now, first thing is very first when talking about Carpenter Brute. Number one, Carpenter Brute was never into electronic music. His background was strictly into rock and metal, and he was of that community. Although he's admitted to being a big Justice fan, which, I mean, makes a lot of sense when you listen to Disco Zombie Italia, because that song is like the most Justice-ass Justice song that Justice never wrote. And two, everything he learned about using synthesizers and electronic music, he learned through tutorials on YouTube. And Trilogy sounds like that when you have all that in mind. And to me, I think this is one of, if not the best synthwave ever created of all time. Although this might be one of those Minor Threat complete discography situations where it's like, am I cheating for placing an album that's basically a collection of EPs? Maybe, probably not. But like, when it goes this fucking hard for 81 minutes, what do you want me to do? Like, listen to this track list. Disco Zombie Italia, Wake Up the President, Meet Matt Stryker, La Perv, Paradise Warfare, Invasion AD, fucking Roller Mobster, and Turbo Killer. Every single track I just mentioned is a greatest hits album on its own. Like, the first time I heard Roller Mobster, I literally thought my phone was fucking up because it was going so hard and so fast. And by mixing this ferocity of the metal riffs through the language of synthwave, given that he was a part of the metal community, you essentially get into the less dreamy or nostalgic tendencies of like a Time Cop 1983 or FM 84, and more of like a seedy or an ominous and gritty synth sounds that were very directly influenced by, of course, John Carpenter. And What makes this album so effective is that it runs the gamut of strictly diverse soundscapes within the album that makes its runtime feel far more breezier and unique than you're expecting. Whether that's like the more disco funk-laden tracks like Disco Zombie Italia, more straightforward synth tracks in the form of 347 Midnight Demons, more neon highway ragers like LA Venice Bitch 80s and Paradise Warfare, to the sci-fi cyberpunk energy of La Perv and Meet Matt Stryker, or just the overwhelmingly abrasive and slasher villain aggression of Wake Up the President, Turbo Killer, and Roller Lobster, really shows his skill in trying to give a little something to everyone through all the influence that he injects into his music. But to me, I think it's in his more subdued tracks, like Escape from Midwich Valley and The Closing Invasion AD, where the most obvious John Carpenter influence is found, being that Carpenter Brute will layer his tracks to get the maximum amount of ominous dread from it. And the best example is where in like Escape from Midwich Valley, where he'll start with these drawn out, low register synth notes and layer it with this methodical bass and drum and even radio static, to even like building upon it with sludgier synth riffs, only to gradually taper off into like more twinkly synths that completely disarm you as the viewer to be like, okay, we're put at ease, the killer's finally been beaten, only to just like explode with pounding and overwhelming synths that make you go as the listener, oh shit, no, we did not kill this villain. Where it's this perfect exercise in like the theater of the mind that Synthwave is so good at, where it's crafting its own narrative as the song is playing out. All of this, like, and as well, I'll say this about the next album in the list, challenges the notion of what Synthwave can be, being like, oh yeah, the 80s were cool, but the 80s were super terrifying, right? And the sound that Brute and other artists in the dark synth genre offer reflects the mirror onto the media that criticized the 80s by pulling from horror or cyberpunk or crime films, that above all that, Brute is just breaking his foot into this album's ass. Like every track is just so catchy and so intense, and the way he'll layer his instruments and drums in such a unique way that there's constantly something going on in the background and the foreground. Be they the fast songs or the heavy songs, he has these songs that fade and distort into the next track to create this like endless wave, like you're playing Hotline Miami, of which its sequel includes La Perv and Roller Lobster from this very album. Now, I'll stop myself there, but in short, this album really is the bridge that unites metal with synth, John Carpenter filmography, and horror movie dread for music that is weirdly actually more accessible than many people would give credit to, and my personal favorite Synthwave album, Hail the King of Dark Synth, Hail Carpenter Brute.
You're damn right.
Who doesn't drink water?
What an album. Like, genuinely, it's such an incredibly put together album, and it's not cheating. It's not cheating in any sense, because I love the minor threat. I love the minor threat discography as well. So
yeah, just God, that
great
album.
Choice.
Whew.
Great choice, and especially if I want to get, for me, I know it sounds really silly, but Trilogy is that sort of album that I will listen to if I am under immense time pressure to get a project done. You will not believe how fast I can get an edit done when I'm hearing Turbo Killer in my headset.
Honestly, it's the album where like you gotta get shit done.
Yeah.
The perfect you gotta get shit done album. All right, Sam, what is your next pick?
So, my final pick for this is the most recent album, as of this video's upload anyway, release. And my goodness, it is probably one of my favorite albums of 2024. And that is Lost by Kallax. So Lee Blanchard, based in Liverpool, grew up with a massive passion for music. In his early years, he became part of the Liverpool gigging scene, playing bass and providing backing vocals for several metal and alt-rock bands. But it was in 2006 that something changed, After reminiscing about 80s films and listening to his mum's record and tape collection of 80s classics, his love for electronic music was ignited. After several years learning all about synths and electronic music, he took on the name Kallax and released his debut EP Journey in 2013. What followed is a trilogy of tremendous albums from Cal: Metropolis in 2015, Kallax is self-titled in 2017, and Free in 2019. All are recommended listens that really have strong production values, instrumentals, and great features from the likes of Kid Byrne, McRocklin, Anton Vick, and Jay Diggs, who honestly I think did one of Cal's best songs, Out of Time. Great song. Cal's also provided and composed for the likes of Snapchat, the BBC, and provided 2 tracks for the video game Road 96. Highly underrated game. I recommend picking it up if it's on sale on Steam. Now, my choice, album 4, Lost, was a tough road for Cal to get to. I won't go into full detail about it out of all respect of him, but golly, I am so happy that and glad he got Lost finished and released, because I truly feel that is some of his best work to date. Cal, thank you so much for this album, and gosh darn it, you should be proud of this release, as it is an amazing piece of music put together. Why I love this album in particular, out of all of the Cal albums, is that you can tell that this is an artist who has poured his heart and his soul into making sure that this album is as good as it possibly can be. And I'm really, really kind of taken up with it, because the best way I can describe it is that it's an album of a person who is very much low, and eventually from building and working on it, eventually gets back and is happier than ever. I guess if I want to get a bit personal, this year, 2024, it's not been the kindest to me, and it's been very tough to get through some certain situations in my life. And it's weird in a weird circumstance that an album that kind of describes this is released and is so well thought out that it really hits me unlike any other album I've listened to this year. From the opening track Lost, talking about just like how his thoughts and all of his feelings now and his ambitions about being a musician have just all been kind of disappeared, and why am I doing this? Live Without is about kind of that one person that you adore so much that helps you throughout everything, and wishing kind of like I would never wish, anything, like I can't imagine what it would have been like if I didn't have you there. Never Let You Go is a really somber love song with a lot of just amazing ethereal dreamlike synths to it as well. All On You featuring McRocklin, which has an amazing guitar solo in it. Fight For Us is another kind of like love ballad, but very much in the case of like I am so down, but I want to fight for this relationship with everything I have. By Your Side is an amazingly great song, but there's an interesting story about this song. It was originally made as a remix of Los Angeles by The Midnights until it got copyright claimed on YouTube.
Oh no.
And so he had to take the instrumental that he made for Los Angeles and make it into his own song. And in a sense, I'm kind of glad he did, because it was a very strong instrumental. And of course, I want to talk about my favorite 2 tracks on the album. Technically 1, because they both use the same instrumental. The double bill of Lost Not Found and Alive Lost Now Found. The story behind it, again, is very much indicative of what the album is. When he made and released Lost Not Found as the instrumental, as Cal put it in his description of the video, it was made at a time where he was feeling very down and a lot of personal stuff had kind of hit him all at once, and he wasn't sure if he was ever going to get the fourth album out. And cut to about 6-7 months later, he releases a lyrical version of that song called Alive, Lost, Now Found, where it's basically just, I got through the other side of it. I love this person and my partner with every fiber of my being, and I am going to do it with lots and lots of saxophones over the song now. I'm underselling it in a sense, but honestly, to me, that double bill hit me harder than any other song I have ever listened to for a while. So from that reason alone, and Cal, if you are listening, thank you, because you really helped me out in a situation where I was not feeling very great about myself. So Cal, from the bottom of my heart, thank you. And you deserve to have this album recognized by a lot more people, because your fourth album was tremendous. And I hope you keep continuing to make music, sir.
And to break the fourth wall a little bit, Sam, in general, I'm glad that you're still here too, and we want you to still edit and be there for us, man.
Thank you, mate. Thank you.
I really appreciate you.
I'm starting to well up, so thank you, man, honestly.
Well, that sounds right. Fourth wall back up. Sounds like a really good album. Like, it sounds like something that I totally, because like, I don't know what your experiences were like, but 2024 was also kind of rough for me. And I feel like something like that definitely would hit really hard if I were to listen to it. And thank you so much for recommending that album. Wow. I definitely gotta hit that up. Final album. I want you to refer back to the spectrum again. So we've gone from John Hughes film. We've gone to 80s sci-fi film. We've gone to Miami Vice episode. We've gone to John Carpenter film. And my final pick is like that really forbidden section of the video store that your parents tell you not to go to, where like that's where you'll find your Wicked City, your Demon City Shinjuku, or if you're a real sicko, Lamberto Bava's 1985 film, Demons.
Yeah.
That type beat. And my final pick, the heaviest and darkest that I can think of, is 2015's Behemoth by Ghost. Now, everything I said about Carpenter Brute and his music is also very applicable to one James Lawler, aka Ghost. Both were in metal communities. Ghost actually played in metal and hardcore bands. Both were really inspired by John Carpenter and 1980s horror. Both had a metal background that challenged the notion of what synthwave can be and is.
I'm gonna see how far I can push that genre or whatever, because a lot of people that like synthwave are really stark in like what they like about it. And so, I mean, I've always liked agitating people, whether it's in art or, you know, politics, any kind of thing that I take interest in. I like to kind of ruffle people's feathers a bit, you know, not offend people per se, but maybe offend their perceptions of what something they like should or could be.
But I think personally, what separates Carpenter Brute from Ghost is that I believe that Ghost is just pure evil. Like, everything about this album is just sinister to its core. And at its most light and upbeat in tracks like Tongue, Ghost synths sting like frigid ice through your skin, stabbing at you with discomfort. And at their heaviest, Ghost synths are like, on like tracks like Master or the title track, sound like the mouth of hell has burst open and all the fire and demons have erupted to elicit the end times. Ghost just cranks the intensity knob far harder than anything that Carpenter Brute had done or any of his most of his contemporaries in that matter. Behemoth is exactly what this album is. It's this monstrously loud and irresistible exercise in just pushing synthwave to its most abrasive and demonic form. From the way the opening track Beyond just billows with this repeating heartbeat and eerie synth stabs before the blaring burst of Guineas Avenue enters in, to the overwhelmingly ominous Nightcrawler that feels like you're being stalked by a slasher villain ready to strung you up as its next victim. A particular highlight of the album is also the only vocal track featuring Haley Stewart of Dead Astronauts fame, who was also in other dark synth acts like Perturbator, who also did a lot of vocal features. With this hauntingly hypnotic repeats of "I can't stop thinking about you," feels like it's the most approachable track on the album, but still really retains that haunting aspect of Ghost's horror movie vibe. And I think that vibe is what makes him so respectable among synthwave fans, and where the correlation to where I think a lot of synth and metalheads meet is that even in later albums where he leans more into like extreme metal and industrial on top of the synth sound that he creates, there's this thread of being fascinated with horror, that particularly 80s horror, feeling like this connective tissue that, despite all the sinister and ominous sounds that he creates in this album, brings everything together to feel this really haunting, nostalgic, and like very, very dark and foreboding sense of sound that you can find anywhere throughout dark synth. But it's here that I find it to be its most sinister and evil and heavy. And that is my final pick.
Damn. And a strong pick as well. And I have it you right as well. Like, metalheads and synthwave kind of like are so well intrinsically linked together. I don't think there are a lot of casuals that don't realize just how well intrinsically tied those two are. And I think Behemoth is such a great example of like metal and synthwave really coming together and really being awesome as well. I love it. Mm-hmm.
And one final point about Ghost that I want to make is that his recent album, Prophecy, goes way harder than this album does. Yeah. And he goes straight into that extreme metal and industrial side. Like, if you like this album and go, I wonder if he goes heavier. But I think... But like, what's so structurally interesting about that album is that one thing that I neglected to mention was that James Lullard grew up in the like very belt buckle of the Bible Belt of Texas. And while he wasn't religious himself, like he saw a lot of like the religious tones that happened in his city. So Prophecy is very much so like taking like the 80s then as a mirror to the times now, with a lot of like religious, like conservative religious notions and like the satanic panic becoming a thing, and creates this really just like abrasive and heavy tone in his music that like feels apocalyptic and tries to like create this world of like what happens when like religious dogma is super like evil and like the devil is real and all this. It's a great album it's a great album as like a reflection of like synthwave and like how important it is now and how it pushes the boundaries of like what it could be beyond just like the nostalgic and the heavy aspects.
It's nostalgic, but dark nostalgia, if you will.
Yeah. Dark synth, if you will. All right. Sam, those are some great picks that you have there.
Nice. Likewise. You had strong picks. And again, I feel like if you're watching this, it's such a great example of how wide the area of synthwave is, that it can go from pop to metal in an absolute pendulum swing, but still be the same genre.
Exactly. And that's why I wanted to make this video too, because I feel like with a lot of the artists that we pick, they represent different facets of like the 1980s being used as a like thematical aspect, where it's like it can be light and nostalgic and poppy, or it can be like dark and foreboding and heavy. And I think like a lot of people, if they only listen to say Nightcrawler, they only listen to like Home by Residence, is what they think all synthwave is. But like it's so much more diverse and interesting than I think that if you give the albums that we listen to today a shot, I think you'll be pleasantly surprised.
Absolutely. And coming from it, you probably start to realize just how much this genre in general has influenced modern music as we know it. I'm not calling out The Weeknd, but he did collaborate with Kavinsky, so I'm just saying. Also, one thing I neglected to mention was that I had no idea Kavinsky closed the Olympics.
So when I heard about that, I was like, yo!
The fact
we made it,
released
boys.
Nightfall as well for that.
Yeah, that's how I knew we made it as a genre.
You know what? If France is going to host the Olympics, then I would have found it very upsetting if they didn't open with Gojira and closed with Kavinsky. Now, granted, they could have closed with Daft Punk, but they exploded and they're never coming back.
Exactly. Like, we can't throw money at explosions.
Exactly.
Exploded robots. I think that rules too, where it's like, we can't get Daft Punk. Justice is probably busy. Who's the next, like, most important cultural figure in France?
Yeah.
Kavinsky. That's awesome. All right, so before we close, is there anything else you want to add to the video?
All I want to say is that, you know, we've been going for 2 hours talking about a niche micro genre of music. And if anything, I just want to say thank you to every single artist that we mentioned here, to every single artist who is in the space that has had music released on YouTube and through NewRetroWave, to every single fan that I have interacted with, to every person I've encountered at live shows for the midnight. This community of people is such, like, so welcoming and so kind of like collaborative and wanting and sharing and so upbeat that it makes me, a person who's very anxious and has social anxiety, being around sort of crowds and gatherings of people, it makes me feel a lot more relaxed and a lot more positive and upbeat about things and life. This whole genre, the community that surrounds it, the artists involved, I can't thank them enough, because it honestly makes life so much easier to kind of bear with.
It really does.
Synthwave's awesome, and if anything, I feel like hopefully this video has kind of shone and let people know Synthwave's really cool. And on a personal note, I just want to say, Andos, thank you for letting me be on camera to co-present this and to be a part of this whole video. To be able to talk with a good friend about this genre is something I've wanted for the longest time. And to do it with you and on your channel as well, man, that's the best. Thank you so much.
Oh, I appreciate that. Thank you. And thank you for being as passionate about this micro genre as I am. Thank you for putting yourself out there. Thank you for being on camera. Thank you for all you do within the community in general. Not just like with your wrestling stuff, but like in general with your edits and whatnot. Thank you so much for putting yourself out there. Thank you so much for being passionate, and thank you so much for being on this video. I really appreciate this.
Thank you, my man. It's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you so much.
And with that said, take care. See you sometimes. May your summers never end, and may your dreams always be in neon.